Hello friends and welcome to my 3-gate Blink build order versus Terran. This is a build that I'd only recommend playing against Terran, but if you're lower level you can probably play this against any race. It's a nice build to play because it has aggression in it, yet good enough eco to transition out of it. You're technically playing a macro game, but if you execute it well and you're below the diamond level or below the masters level even, you should be capable of just instantly killing a lot of players. Now we're first going to go over the build order at a pretty slow pace, and I'll just be explaining the build, and afterwards I'll show you a couple of scenarios which I played, and we'll go over the different responses to certain things. Now, first of all, if you've never seen a build order, I'll be referring to supply numbers. So we're starting with a 14 pylon. That means that the pylon goes down at 14 out of 15 supply. We're basically producing workers all the way throughout, unless I'm saying we're not producing workers right now. In that case, we're temporarily stopping worker production. Now, I like to open up with a Reaper wall. This doesn't allow the Reaper to go into your main base from the main ramp, which is kind of this thing over here. Almost every map, I think actually every map right now has a Reaper jump. I like to wall it. I'm not going to explain you how to wall it. If you want to figure out how to wall against Reapers, you can Google that as well. It's kind of difficult to figure it out on every map, but if you want to put on the effort, I would recommend that. If you don't want to put in the effort to learn how to Reaper wall because you have limited time or because you're lazy, just put your first pylon over here, gateway in this position, and your cybernetics core a little bit towards the right. Form like a semi-wall. After your pylon finishes, instantly start the gateway as well as chrono boost on your nexus. This is very standard. We're going to be playing what is considered the most standard opener in Protoss versus Terran, which is also known as the core before nexus opener, which means that we get the cybernetics core before we get our nexus. We get a gas at 17 supply, and we send our probe out. So the moment we have 16 workers on minerals, the next probe that comes out will be sent across the map as a scout. You can use it to scout around your base for potential proxies, but you don't really have to, because our build is pretty catch-all and thus can defend basically every single proxy as long as you just straight up move across the map. Now, after that probe goes out, we're keeping 16 on minerals with this build the entire way through. We rally into the gas temporarily over here. Actually, not the entire way through, because this is a little thing that I like to do. Not everyone agrees with me on that, but I like to go down with this probe before I build my cybernetics core to see if I'm being eBay blocked. If you've never been eBay blocked in your life because you're playing at a lower level, don't bother with this until it happens to you, and then you can start incorporating it. So what I like to do is I pop down over here, and then I pop back upstairs to throw down the cybernetics core the moment the gateway finishes. This should be, just for a benchmark, between 122 and 124. The moment your core starts later than 124, you've made a significant error in your early game. And I'm going to be mentioning a couple of these benchmarks throughout the video. And if you're practicing this build or you're playing it on the ladder, you can have a very binary yes or no on those types of benchmarks. So when you're watching your replay and you're not sure what to improve on, at least you have these little benchmarks. So you're like, hey, what's my cybernetic score on time? And if the answer is yes, then you get a little check mark for yourself and you can be happy with that. However, if your cybernetic score starts 6 seconds too late, that is something you should work on. You should figure out why it is set 6 seconds late and then fix that issue. After that, we get our Nexus, also at 20 supply, by the way. So both the cybernetic core as well as the Nexus will be thrown down at 20 supply. We start another probe and throw down a 21 pylon. You can also get the pylon at 20, but I prefer a 21 pylon if we're mining a lot of minerals early on in the game. We send this probe back. I said we send this probe back. There you go, Kevin. Good job. And you get your second gas at 22 supply into the game. Your scout moves back. Now, there are two timings that are important with your scout. One is that the first Marine finishes at 1 minute and 46 seconds in game, and the Reaper finishes at the 2-minute mark. So if you want, you can try and scout what the first unit is by leaving it here. But honestly, if you're below Masters 1, just send your worker back after you confirm that there is a command center over here. Command center should go down at around 1 minute and 40 seconds into the game. Now, second gas here on the way, as mentioned. The moment your cybernetics core finishes, you start an adept as well as your warp gate straight away after. Pylon is done, so that all should be fine. And I like to chrono boost my first adept because I don't like dying versus a Reaper. Please chrono boost this first adept. Note that I haven't chrono boosted my probes again quite yet. I am saving my energy for another chrono boost on my gateway to get another adept out as soon as possible. This allows me to send my first adept straight away across the map without really having to worry about anything weird that my opponent can do, because I have that second adept here anyway. If your opponent opened up with a Reaper, sometimes you need to wait a little bit with this first adept to move across until this adept is closer to finishing. But if your opponent opened up with a Marine or with a Reactor, you can send it straight across the map and try to get a little bit of scouting in. If you are not comfortable with the build yet, do not bother scouting, okay? I rather have you not scout and execute the build well than have you scout and mess up the build order. Because a lot of the time what I see at lower level is that people scout something that they don't understand and then they start improvising their build. And when I say improvising, I mean completely ruining something that I've beautifully crafted over the years. So just don't do that. Also, if you don't really know what to do with information and you can execute the build well, just continue executing the build and figure out what to do after the game rather than during the game. It's okay to lose a game because you didn't know how to respond to something rather than messing up a response improvised during the game. That's generally a good rule on how to improve in StarCraft. The moment gas allows it, you throw down the Twilight Council after your second gateway unit, which is an adept. And you get your second gateway as well with the probes that are being rallied down right now. You don't have to cut workers during this. I'm also not chrono boosting workers. Please remember that I'm not chrono boosting workers. I chrono boost workers once in this build order for a very, very long time. You don't have to do it anymore. This is an aggressive build order, not necessarily focused on getting the best eco in the world. It's focused on getting the highest amount of units in the world at a certain timing with certain upgrades and other structures, etc., etc. If you're higher level, you can try and scout over here, see if your opponent has a factory in the wall, or if this is maybe some type of 3-Rex build, or you know, if it's just a fast triple CC, maybe you can get into the main base even. If you're a lower level, don't really bother. The moment your Twilight Council finishes up, start Blink and Chrono Boost it. The moment gas allows, as well as minerals allow it, just build a robotics facility and get a gateway down. Now, the timing of this gateway and the timing of the second gateway as well, the most important thing is that this gateway goes down at about 76, 77 seconds out of 100 in the cybernetics core warp gate. So basically the way that it works, this is once again good information in general, is that a gateway takes 46 seconds to finish up. Now, if you start a gateway at 54 out of 100 on the cybernetics core, that means that your gateway is going to be capable of warping in, or basically turn into a warp gate the moment it finishes, because it is synced up. And then the second wave, if you're building stalkers, is at 77 out of 100, because a stalker cooldown is 23 seconds. So like that, you can join in the second wave. All of your gateways should be perfectly synchronized in that way. I build it a couple of seconds early because I'm just that fast. But really, you can build it 77 out of 100 and you're fine. I always like to do these things in relation to my warp gate timing, because if you use the actual timer or supply, sometimes if you lose a probe early on, or if your opponent mineral harassed you or something, or you forgot to do something improperly in the early game, all of your timings are messed up in your head. So always try to do gateway timings kind of in relation to other gateways or to your warp gate research. That is generally a good rule to have, once again. Now, I'm still not chrono boosting any of my probes. Please do not chrono boost your probes right now. You do not have the cash available. Here I have a very minor probe cut for about half a second. If you chrono boost this, you're just going to have a longer probe cut, which is completely useless. Okay, so do not do that. Instead, we're using our chrono boost on our main tech structures, which are going to be our robotics facility as well as our Twilight Council. Now, before everything here finishes up, I like to get a third pylon, because otherwise you get supply block. Good advice once again. Now, when it comes to pylon positioning, I built my first one over here for the Reaper wall, second one on the low ground for a potential wall as well against either 3-Rex or perhaps Hellion run-bys. And then my third pylon I like to have on the edge in my main base. This allows me a lot of vision in my own main in case there's some type of Hellion drop or a medevac coming from the side from a proxy starport. Or just a really quick medevac with like 7 Marines showing up. I like to have vision of my main base. That's the priority with my third pylon. Okay? My fourth pylon I like to build over here. As you can see, I'm already queuing it up because I'm a very fast guy like that. You have the mineral budget for this, by the way. You can just do that, no problem. As you can see, I'm also still queuing up probes. I'm not cutting any workers, but I'm also not chrono boosting my workers, okay? Don't chrono boost your workers except for the one time. I'm just going to keep repeating it because I already know I'm going to be sent replays. Oh, the build doesn't work out. I have to cut probes 7 times. It's because you're chrono boosting your workers. Do not do that with this build. Instead, we put a second chrono, I kind of missed that, my bad, on the Twilight Council over here. And then we go up to 16 workers on minerals on every single base, okay? So our, by the way, once the warp gate finishes, we start our first Stalker cycle. So please keep that in mind as well. And then look at this. This is the worker count we're working with. We're going to go up here to a perfect 38 workers. Is that correct? Of course that is correct. 16 on these minerals, 16 on these minerals, and 3 in each gas in the main. That brings us to a total of 38. This is the worker count we're going to be chilling on for quite a long time, so get used to that. It is okay to not be building workers at this time. Actually, building workers at this time would be a mistake because it would interfere with your warp gate cycles, with your prism timing, with life in general, and that sucks. It's not what we want. We're going to start a prism the moment the robotics facility finishes up, and we're going to throw a chrono boost on that prism as well. Now, once we get our next chrono boost, which will become available soon, we're going to once again throw it on the Twilight Council. At this point, all we're doing is building pylons, and this is not a great pylon position, but I also don't super mind it. I have good vision on the map. I spread out my adepts a little bit because I'm a cool gangster like that. The moment our warp gate cycles are available, we warp in again. Now here I wait a little bit with this gateway, so it's properly synced up with the others. I freaking hate when they're desynced, and it works out perfectly. Look at that. I had 375 minerals, boom, right as I could warp in, okay? That is just a beautiful thing right here. Note, I am not building any probes. Look at that, I tried starting one, and then boom, the voice in my head told me no more probes. Chrono boost the Twilight Council instead. Prism moves out across the map. Do not start an observer after your prism finishes. I know some of you are going to say, well, in order to make this build safer, I added an observer in. That's not how build orders work, okay? If I'm telling you to do a thing in a certain order, please do stick to it. Because if you build an observer now, you won't be capable of getting your next warp in because your cycle is simply not ready, which is kind of the entire point here. And you build an observer here, actually, maybe you'd be barely capable of doing it. Now you'd have to cut a little bit, yeah, which is what you don't want. Now, once you have 8 stalkers, I like to move across the map. You can start blinking across the map. We get into specifics on how to move stalkers later on when we're going over some scenarios. And then we get our prism towards the other side of the map. Note, before my next warp in here, before my final warp in, or my warp in that allows me to blink in, I get a nexus down. This is not always going to be possible. The reason for that is because this stage of the game is very volatile in Protoss versus Terran, okay? So right now, because I'm playing against an AI, and an AI didn't mine harass me, or send in a Reaper and a Hellion, or kill a probe in the early game, I'm capable of affording this. Many times, you cannot afford this. In that case, priority always goes to the triple stalker warp in that you're about to do. Hitting hard is more important than having a 10-second faster nexus. So if you do not have the cash for it, do not do this, okay? Get the stalker warp in first, which should start in a couple of seconds from now, and then get the nexus if you can, okay? Now, if you have full money, then this is no problem. You can even afford an assimilator, and that is indeed going to be the follow-up. So after you get this warp in and after you get the nexus, you can resume pro production and get a third assimilator, okay? And then at about 5 minutes and 5 seconds, your stalker warping should be done, and you should be capable of jumping into the main base, depending on the map, at about 5:14, 5:15. You have, I'm not quite sure why I picked that up, maybe because I'm a bit of an idiot. With 11 stalkers, this is a magic number because it can one-shot tanks. So if there's a tank here and he's trying to defend, you can kill that. If you want to jump into the natural and there's a tank there, that's also cool. You can also right-click a bunker. There's a lot of options there that you can go for, but this is the basic build order. Now, when it comes to the follow-up, I like to go for this particular one. So I'm just going to show you a game in which, basically in this scenario, the scenario that I'm creating in my head here, is my opponent basically, we're fighting the entire time and I want to warp in more stalkers. So I have continuous stalker production. And then as my first new structure, I want to add in a forge over here. And then once gas allows it, perhaps after my next warp in, I would like to get my charge upgrade going as well. And that is pretty much it for the build order. We're going to go into the follow-ups a little bit later, but first let's have a look at some real life scenarios that often happen against Terran, and we can talk them over. I think there are two scenarios which people play against the most, and scenario 1 is against the factory mine drop, scenario 2 is against 3 Rex. Let's start with the factory mine drop, which we have over here. I've played a game against one of my friends called Georgix. Now, what I do at the 4-minute mark is that I move 2 of my adepts, so both of the adepts that I build, I move them on the map to cover the 2 most popular routes towards my main/third base. This is not necessarily very good against a mine drop, but it's very useful against a 3 Rex because you could see your opponent coming and then have a response. If you are a little bit better, let's say Masters 1, and you figure out what the tech is, you can move these adepts perhaps into more common medevac route locations. But if you're not wanting to scout, just always put your 2 adepts on the 2 most popular routes towards your natural base or towards your third base, natural being the priority. Now, we're keeping our stalkers in between our main base and our natural, because then the moment blink finishes, we're capable of blinking wherever the medevac enters. Now, in this case, my opponent, Jorix, enters before blink finishes up, because he has a very tight build order and is a fantastic player. And as a result, I'm forced into pulling my workers away. I target down the medevac and run away with my workers. Now, ideally, I would have run my workers downstairs into my main base, away from the medevac. Instead, I ran, I countered them, so counter movement. This way, I have to pull some workers. If you don't feel comfortable splitting workers, don't do it like that. Just run away from the medevac, right-click, target fire the medevac, and then kill the mines one by one. Try to sacrifice 1 probe each per mine, but if you don't care, then just send in your stalkers and it should be fine. After you deal with the medevac, continue your plan, warp in stalkers, and basically just move across the map. That is basically it. This is in case your opponent goes in with the medevac, of course. If your opponent doesn't go in, we'll cover that scenario later. If he hangs in the dead space. Most of the time, though, especially at lower level, your opponent will come in. If your opponent doesn't arrive with the medevac, or you don't see a medevac, and you have 8 stalkers, just start moving across the map anyway. If your opponent hits 20, 30 seconds late, that's on them. They probably suck. You're going to be capable of killing them with your stalkers. Okay? So with 8 stalkers, move across the map. Even if you think there's a medevac, if you haven't seen it quite yet, just start moving across and try to go for the kill over here. That's basically it. Now, we'll have a quick look at the follow-up that I go for. So, as you can see, I'm planning on blinking in toward the main base, and that's exactly what I do. Now, the execution is fairly simple. You blink in, and then whatever unit is being attacked, you try to pick up, as well as running away from tank fire. If the tank is in a vulnerable position, you try to snipe it. If you can't snipe the tank, run away from the tank, don't fight in tank fire, and start shooting at things that matter for your opponent. In this case, SCVs. And you can take out SCVs pretty quickly. As you can see, I already took out 4 or 5. This is necessary because, well, you're down in SCVs or down in workers otherwise. He'll probably try to re-siege his tank. Now, in this particular scenario, I think I could have just blinked on top of the tank and killed him and instantly won the game. I decided to not do that because, well, that would be the end of the guide. But this, my opponent here is like 5, I think he's 5'6" or 5'7" MMR. So even against very high-level players, most of the time you're just going to be capable of killing them if you really care for it. You know, if you really want to do that, you can just blink on top of tanks and life should be relatively okay. I decided not to do that, just deal some regular damage instead. Did another Stalker warp in over here, and he's went for a little bit of Raven harass behind this. I get the Forge, I get the Charge, and then I just go up to... The plan basically is to go up to 8 gates on 3 gases, get as many charge load as you can. After your initial rounds of Stalkers, you don't really want to continue adding in more Stalkers because they cost gas and money. You basically just cut Stalkers either after 14 or 17 Stalkers, and then from there on out, all you really do is get your upgrades with the gas, and then you start adding gateways while continuously producing workers. Your goal is to get to 8 gateways, charge, +1 armor, and then once money allows, you throw down a robo base. So just quickly scroll through this. This is not an exact science because every game is different, and also multitasking can be quite difficult. I recommend throwing Chrono Boost on both the Forge as well as on the Twilight Council to get charge. The way you want to move is you want to have your Prism in the dead space. I lost my Prism because I have poor micro. But usually you want to have your Prism in the dead space and then spread some units around to catch any units that try to run around, potentially going for a drop or something in towards your natural. Whether that's a mine drop or in this case a Viking, something like that. Keep your Stalkers in the map. in front of your opponent's base, and then when your opponent starts moving out, you can kite back. If you don't feel comfortable doing this, just run back home with your stalkers, relax, get an observer so you can see when your opponent is moving out, get a battery at your third base as well, and honestly, I think that is pretty much it. This is an early game build order. I'm not going to make an entire guide here explaining how to do the mid game as well, but generally you want to transition into 3 Colossus, and after 3 Colossus start getting Disruptor. That is the general plan in PvT most of the time, while continuing to do charge lot harassment. I'll have all replays versus the AI, as well as the 3 replays that I played against Jorix in the description, so you can just go over it, look at some timings, look at how I deal with certain types of harassment. Let's hop into our next scenario. Now, this game we're playing against a 3-Rex, and as you can see, I have my 2 adepts in the 2 spots on this map. I've identified the 2 locations that are most likely to be taken as the main routes towards my main base, and that will allow me to spot my opponent's move out, hopefully. I'm moving across the map with my Prism, and I decide to move across the map once I have 8 Stalkers. Now, my opponent is hitting relatively late here with the 3-Rex. If he's hitting faster, it doesn't actually matter. In a way, it might even be better the faster he hits, because you're seeing at the same time anyway, and the quicker he hits, the less units he has, and you might still be at home with the Prism. Now, the moment you see him move out with this type of army, it might be quite smart to just either move back home or to recall. If you have time and you scout it early, because for example, your adept is over here and over here, so a little bit further forward, you could even add in a battery if you want to feel extra safe. I don't really think that is necessary though, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. However, if you have no trust whatsoever in your blink micro, you can try to throw down a reactive battery. Once again, this should really not be necessary because you have an insane amount of stalkers versus kind of a low amount of units, honestly, out of the Terran. The way that you want to play this is if they attack into you, you shoot a Marine and then you blink back. You shoot a Marine and then you move back. And if he goes for a stim, you basically blink away and then you run for the hill. That is practically all there really is to it. You can try and chase him if you really want to. So what I'm doing kind of here is like trying to figure out, can I pick off a couple of units for free maybe, or can I not? This is not the most important thing. The most important thing is staying alive. And then after you have stopped it, like these units, you can try and chase them if you have the APM, but I find it more important to focus on the build rather than getting some marginal gains in, in the early stages of the mid game. And the build is very simple after this. You want to go up to 4 gas as soon as you can and throw down a robotics bay as soon as you can as well. At this point, I would recommend adding a battery in each base as well, so that you can feel very safe against any potential follow-ups. You can harass with a Stalker and a Prism and 4 Stalkers and just hop into Colossus as soon as you can. If you're still feeling unsafe, you can add in an Immortal. I would not recommend warping in more Stalkers. I think this is actually a mistake. More Stalkers you build, the harder it is to get the gas units that you actually require. Whether it's going to be Sentries, Immortals, Observers, or Colossus, life is just going to suck a little bit. I like to throw at least 1 or 2 Chronos on my Nexi in this case. You can get a Forge as well over here. Make sure that units can't run by into your bases. And from here on out, it should be fairly simple. I'm not saying you're extremely far ahead or that it's a free win, but I do believe that usually against 3-Rex, Protoss should be ahead. If you kill your opponent and you feel like you can counterattack, go for it. Like if they attack into you at like the 5-minute mark and you don't lose anything, you can counterattack. Most of the time, however, attacking into a Terran that has Marauder production and Stim, unless you have very good control, is not really worth it. So I'd recommend instead to go for 4 Stalker harass in a Prism if you have the APM for it. Once again, in this particular scenario, your aggressive play isn't super necessary as long as you don't take any major losses against the push, and that is best achieved by having those 2 adepts on the map and then with good defensive blink micro. Now once again, the rest of the follow-up will be in the replay. You can watch it for yourself, but the setup basically is going to be the same. You want to go up to 2-3 Colossus and then transition into Disruptors. You can make a push with Charge and 2-3 Colossus. If you want to go up to 6 gas and get Archons, that's allowed. If you want to stay on 4 gas and then get a fast forward base off of 8 gates, that is of course also allowed. Many viable transitions. That's not really what this video is about. Now, then we still have our final scenario to go over, so let's hop into that. This game, my opponent opened up with a very fast factory, Marine into factory. This is a high level build. If you're a lower level player, do not worry about it. If you're a higher level player, just be aware that the medevac is going to hit you about 10-15 seconds quicker. This is easy to scout though, because there's going to be 2 less Marine at the 3-minute mark. So usually there's going to be 5 Marines at that point. With this particular build, there's only going to be 3. If you don't want to think about this, then you're probably not yet at the level where this really is going to matter, because at lower level people just have less tight build orders anyway, and people have no clue how to execute anything. So it generally doesn't tend to matter so much. For higher level players, just count the Marines at the 3-minute mark. If it's 3, it's factory before. If it's 5, then it's straight Marine into reactor. So that's really the only thing. If you do scout this particular build, I'd recommend leaving a probe as well as a pylon on your third. That allows you to very accurately know where your opponent is going to come from. So in this case, I should move my stalkers probably a bit towards my main base. And then when I see this medevac, like right now, which you can reliably see with this probe or with this pylon, you'll just move all of your units in towards your natural. And that is exactly what happens here. I warp in my 3 stalkers and I'm relatively safe. He tries to go in, and here I tell him to leave it in the dead space. And here for the lower level players as well, if your opponent does this particular move, that is frustrating. I think this is one of the best things that Terran can do. And you will need to leave 3 stalkers at home. This is non-negotiable. This sucks and it ruins your build order in a pretty big way, but you're just going to need to leave these 3 stalkers at home. And the way that most top Protoss players play it right now is that they'll still go up to these 11 stalkers. Then they have 8 stalkers on the other side of the map, 3 stalkers at home, get the Nexus of course as well. And then what they do over here is send 4 stalkers into a prism towards the main base to try and harass, and 4 stalkers into the natural to try and harass over there at the same time. This is difficult and requires a lot of multitasking. If you cannot continue your build properly while microing 2 stalker forces, go with the prism in towards the main base to harass. If you don't believe you have the multitasking to do that either, practice it. Okay, practice moving in with a prism while macroing, because this is actually relatively important. If they leave their medevac in a dead space, you don't want to just straight up push with the 8 stalkers. It is often not quite enough. Once again, this is a fairly high level move. I am not expecting people to idle the medevac in dead space with a mine drop, basically up until like Masters 3 or Masters 2. So if you're below that, don't worry too much about it. And if you're above it, you should be capable of controlling at least a prism with 4 stalkers to harass your opponent's mineral line. Against any type of factory build, once again, my suggested follow-up here is going to be charge lots into a forge as well, going back up to those 8 gateways. And here he said, I thought this would be an educational video. And I said, don't be so funny. It's because I'm microed relatively poor with my attack. My multitasking wasn't the best. A cool little move to do, by the way, if you keep the prism alive, which I didn't do in the first game I played, is that the moment you see your opponent move out, is to fly in with the prism and the charge lots. This will force a defensive response out of your opponent and delay their push out, or you get to kill a lot of workers. Make sure to not lose the prism. Priority always is keeping the prism alive over everything else. I'd rather have you keep the prism alive than kill 2 extra SCVs. So just try to keep that in mind. As you can see, the supply, despite not dealing a whole lot of damage, like what did I actually kill? I killed 7 workers. He killed 3. I'm in a very good position right now. 124 supply to 118, 61 workers to 42. Upgrades are pretty much even. I have a prism on the map. He doesn't even have a third base yet. He's just barely now starting it. I'm already transitioning into a robo bay as well. So this is pretty much the follow-up plan. Once again, you can see the rest of the game in here, but he attacks, I warp it into his main base, and he pretty much loses the game. I think I've pretty much covered everything over here. The only situation I haven't covered is if they play Marine into factory into a 4 Hellion drop. And if that is what your opponent is playing, you'll need to build a battery in your natural and potentially full wall. But this, once again, is a build that really only gets played at the high level. I think if you're often playing against that particular build, you probably already have a response to it. And as it's not really played at lower level, I decided not to cover it in a lot of detail. That's pretty much it. If you have any more questions, then that's tough, because this is a video, not a Q&A. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see all of you next time. Bye-bye.